so I unmuted. I'm gonna let people in and just say welcome for there. You can take a look.
Okay. Aloha, everyone. It is 12:56. We will be starting the meeting at 1 p.m., so in 4 minutes.
Revere. 1 minute. Your clock's
Oh, I was like, man, we're starting this early. Sorry, buddy. We'll be starting in 1 minute. It's 12:59.
AG is joining.
So as people are joining, I just ask you to take a look at the housekeeping slides and to keep in mind to keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. And we ask for quorum that commissioners please keep your video on and that any public testimony be kept under a minute. And if you are having any technical issues, to please reach out to me in the chat. Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the July 20, 2022 meeting of the State Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission. It's 1:00 p.m. I am Suzanne Case, the co-chair of the Climate Commission, and will be hosting today's meeting. And I am in the Kalanimoku boardroom with our great team here. We're going to just start by calling your attention to the slides on how we're going to run the meeting. And Revere, do you want to make any announcements on that?
Yeah, just again to remember to keep your microphone muted and just reach out to me, tech support, if you are having any issues and need assistance. You can do that via the Zoom chat.
Please, since this is a sunshine meeting, only use the Zoom chat for tech support, not for any comments. Okay, we're going to start with a roll call. When you state your name, just confirm if there is anyone else in the room with you, any adults. I'm just going to go through the roster by department, so just say here, and let's say if there is anyone else in the room with you, please note. Okay, so first off, Chair, Senate, AEN.
Here.
Chair, Senate, Water and Land. Okay, Chair, House, EEP.
Present.
Chair, House, Water and Land.
Present.
Chair, HTA. Chair, Department of Ag. Chair, DHHL.
Representative
Director,
here.
DHHL.
Present for DBED.
Present for DBED, okay. Director, DOT.
Present for DOT.
Okay, thank you. Director, Department of Health.
Here for the Department of Health.
Director of, Chair, Department of Education. Okay, Director, City and County DPP, Honolulu.
Here, by myself.
Director, Maui Department of Planning.
Jeff Dack, no one else in the room here.
Thank you, and I just want to make a special mahalo to Jeff Dack. I think this is his last meeting here, and so we really appreciate all your contributions, and I hope we can continue connecting as we go along. Okay, Director Hawai'i, Department of Planning.
Aloha, April Supernaut here on behalf of Zindo Kern, and no one is in the room with me.
Thank you, and Director Kauai, Department of Planning.
Aloha,
okay.
present for Ka'aina Hall.
Okay, thank you. And the Adjutant General.
Luke Myers here from IEMA representing Defense. No one's in the room, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's my great pleasure right now, first of all, to introduce our co-chair, Mary Alice Evans.
Here, and no one's in the room with me.
Okay, and in particular, our new coordinator for the Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission, Leah Laramie.
Aloha, everybody. So excited to be taking on this role and be working with all of you. Yes.
So we're lucky to have Leah in this capacity. She's been helping a lot in the last few months as we made this transition to the new coordinator, and she is well suited for it, and she is talented and experienced. Next, I want to acknowledge our Climate Commission Vistas members, Revere Wood and Ernest Rogers. And they've been doing great work on supporting the meeting. And so if you have any issues with Zoom, please direct them to Revere in the chat. We do have a packed agenda today. Public testimony. Hope you can limit your testimony to about a minute or so, just so we can get through everything. So the first item on our agenda is the minutes of the April 6th, 2022 meeting. We do have some technical corrections from Chair Tarnas, so I won't read them out, but we will include them in the final, non-substantive. And are there any other comments on the minutes for April 6th or any public testimony on it? And if not, can I make a motion to pass them as amended? Can I entertain a motion?
So
moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
In favor, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Any objections? Any abstentions? Great, that passes. Okay, next we're going to go on to our legislative updates on the Climate Commission bills, on the climate-related bills that passed in the 2022 legislative session. And I'm happy to recognize Chair Lowen for this, to lead this part of the agenda.
Okay, mahalo. Let me get my screen shared. This is basically a modified version of the same PowerPoint we shared back in April that was just updated to show the bills that we actually did pass, and kind of remove the ones that didn't. So it's a little bit more boiled down, and we kind of already went over who are the legislators serving on the commission. So starting with bills that I grouped here under energy, we had House Bill 1800, which is now Act 238. This is the bill that establishes a nearer term decarbonization goal to be 50% below 2005 levels by 2030, and directs HSEO to create a pathways to decarbonization report to help us figure out how to get there. House Bill 2089, Act 240, this was the administration bill to fix the definition of renewable portfolio standard to get a truer accounting of our progress. And that would be calculated as a percent of generation rather than sales. House Bill 1801 is the state facilities energy efficiency bill. So this will mandate cost-effective energy efficiency measures in state facilities, and also require that new state building construction be energy and water efficient and maximize energy generation potential, and use building materials that reduces the carbon footprint of the project. Whoops. So, jumping around here. And then I added on here Act 140, which is a bill that funds us or directs HNEI to do a study of renewable hydrogen and what role that can play in our future decarbonization. Moving on to clean transportation, we had Senate Bill 2570, which is now Act 241, and this establishes a zero emission vehicle fueling system rebate program. So basically this would be adding a parallel program to our electric vehicle rebate program, a program to help incentivize the installation of hydrogen fueling stations for renewable hydrogen. Act 306, Senate Bill 3158. This establishes a rebate program for the purchase of electric mopeds and electric bicycles. Act 202, or Senate Bill 2720. This just made some small changes to our existing EV charging station rebate program, adding on a single port charging station to qualify and some flexibility to how the funds get used. And then we had a resolution. I actually just noticed this in updating this PowerPoint today. We passed this resolution to create a working group to look at the barriers and issues that we might need to overcome to get more electric vehicle charging systems installed in multi-unit dwellings like condos. And actually realized that the SCR, though we passed the SCR out of the House and Senate, it was then disagreed to by the Senate. So in fact, the concurrent resolution did not pass. So we have these two freestanding resolutions, which are not identical. So I actually don't know if that counts as passing or not. Up until today, I thought it had passed, but I guess that Senator Wakai didn't like it for some reason. And then moving away from the energy and into, these are more bills that Senator Gabbard's committee worked on. So SB 3325, Act 185. This creates incentives for certain land management practices for conservation practices and farming practices that will help to sequester carbon. Senate Bill 304 and HB 1992, which are now Act 302 and 131, both help to incentivize composting, which is important because food waste is such a large part of greenhouse gas emissions, and reducing food waste overall and diverting food waste from landfills is an important part of decarbonization. And then moving on to bills relating to sea level rise and erosion. We had Act 223. Again, this is in Rep. Tarnas's wheelhouse. So any questions afterwards, we can direct his way or if he wants to clarify. This expands the authority of the counties to transfer development rights to address areas at risk of sea level rise, erosion, storm surge, flooding, et cetera. And just unsolicited commentary after some of the impacts we saw from the most recent big south swell. This is something that might be relevant to some of that. Act 208, this expands the reasons for which counties can create special improvement districts to address the effects of climate change. And then Act 299, this requires Department of Transportation to plan for sea level rise in all future or amended transportation projects, and to conform to certain carbon concrete standards. So that's basically reducing the carbon footprint of the construction materials for roads. And then in the conservation bucket, I think there was things not included on this list that actually were funded in the budget. So maybe we can answer that in Q&A after if anything comes up, but it's not on this PowerPoint. But we did re-up funding on the Green Job Youth Corps with Act 333. And then I also noted HCR 36, which was a resolution. Whoops, did I just, can you guys still see my screen? Okay, things are just on my end. Okay. Which creates a coral reef advisory team of youth to engage students in these conversations. And then I threw these on these two resolutions because I know that equity was something that the Climate Commission specifically has put out statements that is something that they're concerned with and that we should be working on. So we did pass these two resolutions relating to energy equity. One would convene a working group to figure out how to create a LIHEAP or low income home energy assistance program at the state level. So that would be able to expand it to more households than what exists under the federal program. And the second one was a resolution requesting the PUC to consider these equity issues just across their work, energy, equity, and justice. And just moving on, I thought I mentioned these things that I know were of interest to the commission and the commission's work, but that did not pass. We had carbon tax, green amendment, the healthy soils bill passed the legislature but was vetoed. Green fees on tourism to help fund conservation efforts, that did not pass. I had a bill earlier in session, didn't get that far, but I think is very relevant to decarbonizing and the work of the commission that was about establishing an implicit carbon price. We had a bill relating to, some reallocating of geothermal royalties to help expand geothermal development or exploration, that was vetoed. And then a bill that came out of the Transportation Committee that established a couple working groups, one to look at inter-island transportation and one electric vehicle sales, and that was also vetoed. Some of these some of the work may still be happening in other ways, I guess I would say, but I wanted to include that list of bills at the end. And that is all that I have. So before I wrap up, I just invite Rep. Tarnas or Senator Gabbard, if you had anything you wanted to add, please go right ahead.
You covered everything. Thanks very much, Chair Lowen.
You got it, Nicole. Thank you very much. Aloha.
Great. In that case, any other questions? And if not, it's back over to you, Mary Alice and Leah.
So thank you so much, Chair Lowen. All right, commissioners, any questions on any of those, the description of all the bills to Rep. Lowen? I see none. Is there any public testimony or comments on this? Okay, also see none. If you have anything that comes up, we can come back to it later. But again, thank you so much. This is really, really helpful to have this summary of the legislative efforts during the session and then the outcomes afterwards. So super helpful for everyone. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 4 on the agenda. I'm going to recognize Co-Chair, Climate Commission Co-Chair Mary Alice Evans, who's going to do a review of the reporting requirements of the Commission under the statute. Mary Alice?
Thank you. Leah, can you share my PowerPoint?
Yeah, we're just going to pull it up right now.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Members, we have been submitting annual reports and have done a tremendous amount of work already, but we have a statutory requirement coming up at the end of this year, 20 days prior to the regular session of 2023, and I wanted to quickly review that with you. Next slide. Okay, so the statute is quite clear that we need to do a 5-year comprehensive review of our progress on the following tasks that have been assigned to us in the law. I'm not going to read them. You can see them. I've underlined key words just to make it easier to look at it. I want to have you review back over and realize that we have made tremendous progress on this that we can report on, but that there will be more that we need to do. Next slide. Okay. Continue. Another slide. Okay. I'd like to mention that I think we have completed some of these things in our comprehensive review due to the ledge next session. I think we'll be able to detail for them that we have submitted annual reports. We are tracking progress, although there are more things that we can track. And we have a terrific website. I had an occasion to look at it this weekend, and I was impressed all over again with how much information is on that website that relates to our charge. Next slide. Okay, this was our first step in the statute. It actually called it out as our first step, and we have completed that. We have the sea level rise exposure area viewer up. And I believe we have met all of the requirements that were detailed in the law for that. We are required to reevaluate and update every 5 years. So we'll be looking to our partners, especially the University of Hawaii, to help us with that task. Now, I think that is our last slide. So I wanted to end by saying that because we have a limited staff, that is our climate change coordinator, Leah, she will need your help and we will need your help in documenting in our first 5-year comprehensive review, our progress on these tasks. Thank you all. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you very much. All right, Commissioners, any questions about this? And seeing none, is there any public testimony on this reporting requirement? Okay, so thank you very much, Co-Chair Evans. And so as a result of this reporting requirement, we wanted to spend a little extra time today doing the updates that we've been doing that I personally find so very helpful in kind of sharing ideas and directions. I think it really helps us all move together in new directions. And so we do want to make sure you have enough time to do these updates, and we're going to use them to feed into our 5-year report. So please feel free to be detailed. I'm going to call on commissioners. I am going to start with the director of the City and County of Honolulu DPP. He's got to leave a little early, so I think it's Dean Uchida here.
I'm here, Chair.
Okay. Do you have any updates for us?
Yes, thank you. Well, we're about to issue an RFP to bring on a consultant to do 2 things. One is to help set up an office or a branch in our land use permitting division, basically to handle all the SMA permits and shoreline issues. We saw a 65% jump in the number of SMA permits based on Act 16 that the legislature passed a couple of years ago. So all this additional work came on without any additional staff. So we're staffing up that and creating a new branch just to deal with the shoreline issues. The second thing that I think the commission would be interested in is we're going to put out a RFP to bring on a consultant to do a study or a plan for managed retreat on Oahu. We want to basically take like a 6-foot sea level rise area, identify the land areas by zoning that are being impacted, and then try and identify how much replacement land we might need, probably coming out of the ag lands, bulk of the urban areas. The concern is we're doing a little kind of mini study in Opuna, the One Water program that the city is looking at. And based on that study, most of Opuna all the way through Mauna Loa Park will be underwater at 3.2 or 6 feet sea level rise. That area is probably one of the denser areas for industrial zone land on Oahu. And we don't have any replacement industrial zone land. So the question of where we're going to relocate these tenants to came up. And there is no place to relocate them to. So planning ahead, we wanted to see if we could identify areas that potentially could be used for relocation. The bill that passed out on the transfer development right is tied to this managed retreat study. We plan on using that transfer development right with the managed retreat to try and set something up where businesses and homeowners impacted by sea level rise will have an opportunity to move to safer grounds. So that's kind of in the works right now. As I said, we're working on the RFP. It should be going out probably in the next couple of months or so. That's all I got for you now, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Very, very interesting. Am I just going to go down those?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start then on the list with the Chair of the Senate, AEN. Chair Everett.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Well, as we all know, all 76 legislators are up for a re-election. So some of us may not be there. We have to wait and see. But in terms of planning for this this upcoming session, we're just taking a look at all the bills that Chair Lowen mentioned that died. And one of the ones that sticks out to me is the green fees bill. I think that with the transformation of HTA to regenerative tourism, I've just been stoked watching the evening news and seeing our tourists out there planting taro in the lo'i and cleaning up plastic off of our beaches. But I'm sure they're not going to hesitate to contribute to the cause and perhaps get some more money into DLNR to help you with your programs, Chair Case. And so that will be one of the priorities for me in terms of going into this next session if I'm reelected. But other than that, we're just taking a look at the full spectrum of all the bills that did not make it. Thankful to the governor for signing the ones that did. And yeah, that's about it.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Chair Senate Water Land is absent. I think Chair House EEP.
Sure, thank you. I guess you guys just saw our presentation. Some of those measures that didn't pass, I think are important to continue to come back to. So, as I mentioned, I think the implicit carbon price or social cost of carbon could be an important piece when we talk about decarbonization, because although we have 100% RPS, that's not linked in any explicit way to emissions. And, every type of energy production has some kind of emissions associated with it, but it is important to understand those and rank them and think about it. And then think about the emissions impact of our infrastructure projects, et cetera, as well, both in the materials that they're built with, but also like how they contribute systematically. Other things maybe not on that list I'm working on. One is looking at hydrofluorocarbons. We had a bill several years ago and there has been action from the EPA on this, but I think looking at maybe creating a program to incentivize proper disposal of existing hydrocarbons in the state might be a useful thing to look at. I think continuing this conversation, of course, around clean transportation, particularly aviation, is important. And then geothermal, I think we need to continue to talk about geothermal and how we can work with communities where these resources might be present to work together to get buy-in, to be able to work on expanding these resources, because I really do think geothermal could be key to a lot of our efforts to decarbonize in Hawaii. And as Senator Gabbard mentioned as well, I think the plastic waste piece, we're going to continue to work on that. I mean, that's related in maybe a more peripheral way. It hasn't been explicitly stated by the Climate Commission that that's part of what they're paying attention to, but I think that's important. We'll keep working on that among, I'm sure, many other things. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, next up is Chair House Water and Land.
Thank you, Chair. I think we'll be focusing on any other legislative bills that relate to adaptive management, adapting to the effects of sea level rise and climate change, and CIP budget items that relate to that particular thing. How do we address infrastructure impacts of sea level rise? So I'd be looking to the departments for your priorities for capital improvement project that relate to this. And also I would welcome any suggested bills that you may have, members and the public, for addressing and climate change, especially adapting to sea level rise and other effects of climate change. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Case.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think we have HTA and DOA are not here and OHA are not here. If I missed you, then let me know. DHHL.
Hi, aloha, Chair Case and Commissioners. I'm Nancy McPherson. I'm standing in for Tyler Gomes, who's at the CNHA conference. Just briefly, we've reported at the last meeting on our major initiatives in the area of energy, equity. We're doing a general plan update, so we're in the final round of beneficiary engagement, and that general plan has climate change policies throughout the document. So a lot of our priorities for 2022 and beyond are going to be backed up by that general plan. So we're really hoping to finalize that by the end of the year. We're also moving forward with a Molokai Coastal Community Resilience Plan. We're also applying for an America the Beautiful Challenge grant for implementation of a Koa Forest Restoration project on the Big Island. We are participating in the State Climate Commission, the Honolulu Climate Commission. We're meeting with the PUC representative and the Energy Equity Hui to talk about energy issues specific to Native Hawaiians. We are still working on alternative wastewater treatment technologies. So cesspool conversions, especially as it relates to sea level rise. So those priority areas that are in the Mackay areas are a high priority. And we are also looking at mitigating land-based pollution via better land management practices. So we're very interested in the Carbon Smart Land Management Assistance Pilot Program. And so we're hoping that by implementing this updated general plan that we're going to be able to move forward a little bit faster on a lot of our initiatives. Well, thank you.
Super, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Okay, DBED.
Thank you, Chair Case. On behalf of DBED, Scott Glenn, Chief Energy Officer, and I'm just going to share some reports focusing more on the energy space. First, just to report that in terms of the state's renewable energy goals from 2014 to 2021, the end of 2021, the state of Hawaii doubled its renewable energy from about 20% to 40%. And so we are not only on track, we're ahead of schedule for our renewable percentage targets. Now that's based on the previous accounting system where it was based on net sales. We have a new accounting system based on generation and the law that Governor just signed a couple of weeks ago. And we're calculating what the change in numbers is. However, we are confident that we not only exceeded our goals counting from generation, but we're ahead of schedule on that as well. And in particular, we have the island of Kauai, which is at 70% most days, and in some days even 100% renewable energy for its electricity. So we're making very good progress on our renewable energy goals for electricity. Second, the coal plant is scheduled to be retired September 1st. So we're about 40 days away from that. And we have several projects in the works to replace that coal plant energy. Unfortunately, due to a lot of complications in terms of permitting and global supply chains and other complicating factors, most of the projects to replace the coal plant energy won't come online until after September 1. Although we do have at least one project that will be energized before then. And then we also have a lot of rooftop solar and battery coming online to help provide more power. That's an important thing to keep in mind because right now we are experiencing high levels of volatility in the oil market with price spikes happening. The last time we saw something like this was in 2008 when the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative was first launched. And so we are collaborating with the counties and other state agencies in the private sector to try to control costs for individuals, businesses, families, and islands as a whole to reduce the cost of electricity and the exposure to the price volatility that people are experiencing and will probably experience over the next year. Couple other just quick notes. We are also, we're reviewing the Infrastructure Act for competitive funding opportunities, and we'll be reaching out to the public with different grant opportunities over the coming months as we digest it and the Department of Energy puts out funding opportunity announcements, and we'll be looking to bring as much of that money to Hawaii as we can. And then lastly, just a note, we have a new website that's come out. I hope folks have a chance to look at it. It's energy.hawaii.gov. That's been our URL, but we revamped it to help make it more accessible to anyone, not just energy experts. So I hope folks are able to use it, take a look at it, If something's missing or you have ideas for improvements or you find a typo, please feel free to contact us. We very much welcome feedback on the website. So thank you. That concludes our report.
So much. And now I'm going to call on DLNR. We have Emma Ewan here for DLNR.
I'm Emma Ewan with the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and going to focus on some of our updates here. We did do much better in the legislature with watershed funding. We were able to get $8 million for that, which was really key to continuing our ability to match some federal grants that we are receiving from NRCS. They gave us about $5 million that we are passing along to private entities to do tree planting and weed control projects. So that's actually something that we have a big RFP out this month, and it's due next month to enroll a bunch of new entities in these large-scale tree planting initiatives. And we also have been working on continuing to reach towards our 2030 watershed goal. We've finished some big fence projects in Hawai'i, and we have about 50 different fence projects that we're currently working on right now. So it's a long list, but really hoping to focus on that, because while there's a lot of interest in tree planting, we also need to keep the trees alive that are out there right now and keep our old growth forests safe from destruction from hoofed animals. So that remains to be a priority. That's all I had for DLNR. We have so many different initiatives that don't know what to add, but I just wanted to highlight some of those.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that very much. Okay, Department of Transportation.
Sorry, Jerry. David Rogers, Department of Transportation. The DOT has received inquiries in regards to Act 306. The DOT is looking to establish the e-bike program. And for now, details will be forthcoming once the application and administrative process for the program are set up. That's all I have to report.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Department of Health.
Hi, this is Marianne Rossio standing in for the Department of Health. We've got a couple things going on. So I think last time I reported that the Clean Air Branch's statewide greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we had entered it into a contract with ICF Incorporated. So we had the project kickoff meeting in May, and the first deliverable is going to be due in August, which will include draft numbers for new inventories for the years 2005, 18, and 19. And then in November, statewide projections through 2045, the first numbers are supposed to come out. So we're going to be looking for our partners to help us in that review, so that we can review and comment before we finalize the numbers in the first of 3 reports. Secondly, the Department of Health's Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion Division is working to initiate an air quality improvements from transportation demand management project, which will be supported by our federal clean air grant. So they'll focus on supporting transportation demand management, or TDM, programs that serve non-white collar workers, particularly those traveling to and from rural and exurban communities. It'll include existing TDM efforts and the inclusion of equity in Hawaii, identify equitable TDM strategies, incorporate community engagement and selection of TDM strategies, and result in development of an action plan to pilot equitable TDM strategies. From our hazard and evaluation and emergency response group, They recently provided a webinar on climate change and chemical contamination to over 100 participants from Hawaii and across the US. Participants included academia, people from academia, state and federal government, and environmental consulting sectors. From our wastewater branch, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Load Program is now prioritizing funding of wastewater projects that promote sustainable infrastructure to withstand the effects of rising sea level due to climate change and provides adaptation for coastline inundation. See, our solid waste program, which regulates the design and operation of solid waste management facilities, is now looking at other landfills, citing criteria such as revised tsunami zones to account for impact of climate change. From our hazardous waste program, they reported on the Hawaii Green Business Program, which assists and recognizes businesses that strive to operate in environmentally, cultural, and socially responsible manner. It's a partnership between the state's Department of Health, DBED, and Board of Water Supply that the program recognizes businesses that are committed to going green by implementing energy and resource efficiency practices. Last year in 2021, they assisted 12 businesses to reduce carbon emissions by 5,166 metric tons, which is equivalent to about 1,112 gasoline-powered passenger vehicles driven for 1 year off the road, or powering 1,005 homes electricity for a year. And lastly, just wanted to mention that our appreciation on the passage by the legislature of a climate and health coordinator position for DOH to be based in the Environmental Health Administration. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Sure, thanks very much. And DOE, I think, is not here. Maui, Department of Planning.
Yes, good afternoon. Yeah, the Mai County Planning Department is still working on trying to get our shoreline rules for shoreline setbacks updated to as a primary tool for implementation of the sea level rise vulnerability adaptation report that the commission adopted in 5 years ago. But while we're waiting to be able to get that up for adoption, we're actually, I should say we're not waiting in terms of responding to concerns about possible impacts and development within the sea level rise exposure area. And I apologize, I don't see that my video is coming across. Anyway, I'll just continue. So administratively, we're working with HRS 205A, which requires that projects that are in the special management area end up with basically no or possible environmental impacts or significant mitigation. So we're requiring that any new development that may fall within the sea level rise exposure area and may possibly therefore have some impacts on them or them impacting the area, that they come up with mitigation, avoidance and mitigation planning for everything that goes into the sea level rise exposure area. So we're working, that includes reviews of hundreds of projects each year where we're requiring mitigation for SLOREX impacts. We've been working for quite a while with at least 3 communities, particularly starting out with Kahana Bay, still working on a response to coastal erosion in that area, and then working also with Hui groups in the Pili and Ma'alaya area. We appreciate the state legislature's recent facilitation of community improvement districts, because that is the tool that we've been using for Kahana Bay already. Our Department of Parks and Recreation is going through a series of master plans that are all, since they by far are mostly on the coastal area and are subject to sea level rise, they're being comprehensively reviewed. New master planning all taken into effect and responding to impacts of anticipated impacts of sea level rise. There's also climate change policies that are going into our various community plan updates. Our departments of Parks, Public Works, Wastewater, Water and Wastewater Division have all prepared sea level rise vulnerability reports, and they and there's adaptive responses that are occurring as a result of that right now. In part, for example, our Kahului wastewater treatment plant that was built pretty much at sea level, probably a good 20 or 30 years ago. There's plans working out to move part of that necessary treatment facility way inland into Puunene, and then longer term plans to move it farther away from the shoreline to eventually decommission the current plant completely. We also have Office of Climate Change Resiliency and Sustainability that's doing a good number of things. Alex Darude, the Energy Commissioner, emailed has an email that has gone to Leah that has a series of actions going on that I'll just briefly go through. That office is pursuing a developing climate action resiliency plan, working on resiliency hubs networks. They're working to take all the various individual departments vulnerability assessments, put together one countywide climate change vulnerability assessment. They've updated greenhouse gas inventories for 2016, 2019, working on non-renewable energy opportunities, and have developed or working on a fire and heat map index. And lastly, I'll mention that for Molokai, the island of Molokai is working on, or representatives from there have working on Molokai climate change and sea level adaptation and resiliency plan. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Next up is Maui Department of Planning. Hawaii Island Department of Planning.
Aloha, Chair. Thank you. So we also are working on our shoreline setback rule. We have been a little behind the other counties in that way, but we are jumping forward fast in the development of a new shoreline setback, and we're debating if that will remain in rule or if we will incorporate that into code. We're also making sure, of course, that it addresses sea level rise and flooding, and we're particularly looking at inundation rates as part of that equation. We are doing a comprehensive code update for our zoning and subdivision codes, and we will be incorporating hazard mitigation measures into our code in the appropriate locations, and we'll have a parking lot for other code amendments, related code amendments that may also need to happen in other codes. But right now we're concentrating on zoning and subdivision. We are also hopefully reaching the end of our general plan comprehensive update, which thoroughly addresses climate change throughout the plan and also has its own chapter particular to climate change. We are planning is partnering with Research and Development Department on the Climate Action Plan. We are in the middle of drafting our CAP and anticipate completion sometime in October. So far, we have completed our greenhouse gas inventory. We have a hazard mitigation and risk and vulnerability assessment, which looks at hazards and social vulnerabilities. We have an overall framework that includes the cascade effects of the causes of climate change and their compounding impacts. And then we have also been working on the draft actions related particularly to greenhouse gas mitigation. So we'll keep you posted on the progress of that plan. We are also updating, we have just started updating our capital improvement program process and looking at asset management, different ways of collaborating and looking at asset management overall as a county with all of the different infrastructure departments, and hoping to improve the interdepartmental collaboration on various projects, as well as better efficiency in implementing some of the infrastructure projects that we have. The planning department is proud to say that we are 95% paperless in our office. So that's been a big project for the last 2 years, and we've done it, and all with the help of the electronic filing system that we now have and permit processing that we now have. And so that has really been the impetus for us to just go completely paperless. So it's been really great. We are supporting the geothermal expansion for Puna Geothermal. They are getting ready to release their EIS process. And so we will be supporting that, and we are accepting authority on that EIS. And then the last piece is also very exciting. We are the first in the state to have and use hydrogen buses. We have one delivered and it is almost ready for service. And we have 2 more coming online this year. The range of these buses is 200 miles, plus they have a lithium battery with about a 25-mile range. Currently, our fueling station is at Nelha, which is near the Kona airport. And we have applied for grants to get 6 more buses and an additional fueling station at the Kona base yard. And our Mass Transit Authority's goal is to be 100% zero emissions with their buses by 2035. And that concludes our report.
Great, super, thanks so much. Next up is Kauai, Department of Planning.
Aloha. I am Alicia Summers. I'm standing in for Ka'aina Hall for the County of Kauai Planning Department. And we don't have any updates to report today. And Ka'aina said that we'll be able to give you a more thorough brief about our proposed sea level rise constraint district bill at the next commission meeting. So mahalo.
Okay, thank you for that. Next up is the Adjutant General.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. Luke Myers, Administrator from HEMA, representing Defense. Obviously, we tend to look at climate change in a little bit more uncomfortable lens. We did see Darby spin up a very small tropical system in the Eastern Pacific that went from a tropical low to a Category 4 hurricane in a very short amount of time, even in La Nina conditions. Fortunately, we have the graveyard of the Pacific of cool water to the east of us and an upper level trough that protected us. But it does show you, and it does provide an uncomfortable type of situation with a large tropical system being able to spin up in less than 48 hours from a tropical storm to a Category 4, that we have to be ready, and all the investments that collectively the state is making are vitally important. We also saw impacts from a South Shore swell, which one of the other members has already mentioned, just with coincidence of maybe a more routine high tide and full moon flooding with larger waves. We saw damage in a number of islands. We are doing some damage and impact assessment with the counties and some of the state agencies on potential federal assistance. It doesn't look like we're going to hit any thresholds at this time, but we continue to work that. A couple of legislative items I would like to call out. The climate resilience lens can vary. We did have Senate Bill 1107, which was passed. It amended 127.18, and it allows for a further expansion of natural hazard mitigation under 127.18 on private property. And it also provided $500,000 in funds. So this was a carryover bill from the previous session. We were excited that it got support in the ledge and from the governor's office. So we'll be looking at ways to expand on this. Traditionally, these funds were used for albizia mitigation, but one of the projects that we are potentially exploring with a couple of state agencies is maybe adopting a creek or stream. We have seen that in many of our flooding situations, these dry creek beds, drainage areas don't pose much of a threat, but when it floods and it rains a lot, they pose a extreme threat. So we are potentially looking at adopt a drainage ditch type of program in support with some others. The other one, which I'm really excited about, is House Bill 1588. And there's the Federal Storm Act, which allows states to set up a revolving loan fund to match federal mitigation grants. with this revolving loan fund with seed money from the state. So Representative Ichiyama provided a lot of impetus with this bill. Very thankful for her work. And again, $500,000 was set aside to have a position or two associated with this and to start a programmatic side. Right now, there's about $500 million set aside for the Storm Act. And we're waiting to see if FEMA is going to come up with their programmatic guidance. But two big mitigation capabilities as we look forward. A little bit longer term front, we continue the update with Tetra Tech, who is going to be our contractor for the 2023 State Hazard Mitigation Plan update. So we had a kickoff meeting with that, working with many of the partners as part of our State Hazard Mitigation Forum. And then two areas that have been kind of mentioned a little bit here. HYEMA is working on an equity viewer when it comes to the hazards that we face. And I know a number of state agencies and partners are also looking at that, the way that we kind of look at vulnerable populations and communities. So with some guidance that we've got from FEMA on the mitigation planning front, we are looking at a specific viewer for the mitigation projects that there may be some benefit in kind of cross-pollinating. The other one that I'll mention, ma'am, is with some of the hazard mitigation funds, HYEMA is going to be standing up a home retrofit program. This would primarily be looking at hurricane clips. We've seen a lot of examples, not here locally, but in other areas impacted by tropical systems. A lot of our building stock is pretty unique, especially when you go back prior to the 80s. And many of the homes don't even have hurricane clips. So looking at an opportunity and mirroring some other state partners programs, HYEMA trying to invest some of our hazard mitigation grant program dollars in that area. And lastly, I heard the resiliency hubs term used a little while ago. Coming out of this session, resiliency hubs were used a number of different ways. HYEMA got a little pinned with what does this mean and how is it being done. HYEMA will be doing an assessment with each of the county emergency managers on how that term is being used. We do know that at a local level, some community members are using the term resiliency hub different than a state or county governmental agency. We definitely believe in the spirit of resiliency and climate reduction, and we believe in having the resources there. But we want to be really clear that if Hawaii County has one definition of a resiliency hub and Oahu has another, when that goes forward, we want to be clear of what the expectations are of those potential capabilities. I appreciate the time to share. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. All right, that's it on our list. I'm gonna just remembered one thing to add for DLNR, my personal favorite, which is we have a collaboration with the Division of Boating and Ocean Recreation and Pacific Biodiesel. We've put a mobile biodiesel B100 fueling station in Ma'alaya Harbor on Maui, and just yesterday one went online at Honokaha Harbor in Kona. So now if you have a diesel vehicle, you can go fuel up at the harbor there in Kona or Maui, and the boaters can fuel up on it. This biodiesel is very good for boats and the water and reefs. So we're excited about that. Okay. Lastly, we have Office of Planning and Sustainable Development.
Chair, our representative Justine Pali is unable to be here today. I will mention that we've started a study on regional strategies for sea level rise, both mitigation and adaptations. Regional because you can't do parcel by parcel adaptations without impacting the adjoining parcels. So we're looking at creating a framework for looking at regional areas for adaptations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. All right, that brings us to the end of our legislative updates. And we will, unless anybody wants a break, we will move on right now to our, I'm sorry, questions from commissioners on any of these things. Okay, and is there any public testimony on any of these? Okay, hearing none. We're going to move ahead to the next item on our agenda, which is on urban forestry and the newly launched tree canopy viewer. And we're very happy to have here Heather McMillan and Braden Aki doing this presentation. Please go ahead.
Hello, Dean. Thanks for joining. I think, Heather, we're just getting your slides up now.
Great. Thank you, Leah. And thank you for the invitation to be with you all here today. My name is Heather McMillan, and I am the Urban and Community Forester with DLNR. I am joined by Braden Aki, who is our GIS technician. He is the technical expert behind creating the tree canopy viewer, and he'll also be available to help answer any of the technical questions you might have at the end of our presentation. Next slide, please. I'd like to just orient us by telling you a little bit about Ka'ulunani. That's the name of our state's urban and community forestry program. And our mission is to support all of Hawaii's communities to cultivate well-being and resilience through planting, caring for, and growing relationships with the trees and forests that we live with and that are crucial to the ecosystems on which we rely. Next slide. You might be asking yourself, what is an urban forest anyway? These words seem to not go together, but I'll just clarify that an urban forest is, it's your tree, it's my landlord's tree, it's our neighbor's tree, trees on private property. These are also street trees, so municipal trees, trees that are part of green infrastructure, nature-based solutions like bioswales and rain gardens, trees that you find in pocket parks, urban parks, which can be state, county, or private, and also linear parks, like you can imagine along the Alawai Canal. So we think of these as the forest all around us, where we live, work, learn, and play. Next slide. Every state has an urban and community forestry program, but as is the case with most things in Hawaii, we cannot just really take a page from a continental model of a program. So in Hawaii, our urban and community forestry also includes cultural landscapes that may be nestled in wetlands and include culturally important structures like heiau, or include ritual sites. They include agroforest, organic farms, and also community managed public forest, as you see here. Next slide. Today, I'll be making the point that many of you already get, which is that trees are important, but we also really want to emphasize that these are not just a nice to do or a way of beautifying a place. They are critical infrastructure for our survival. And unlike other kinds of infrastructure like stoplights or fire hydrants, trees actually increase in value over time. So they're worth spending money on. As a tree grows, its value and the services that it provides increases threefold. So again, they do cost money, but they also are great investments. Next slide. In addition to those economic benefits, we know that urban and community trees provide a wealth of other benefits, including human health. This is especially relevant now with the understanding of the heat waves that are going on around the world. Trees really are important for reducing temperatures and other climate adaptation strategies. In a nutshell, research shows that green communities with trees are happier, healthier, smarter, safer, and more resilient. Next slide. So today I want to tell you a little bit about something I'm really excited about. Many years in the making through a partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, we have Hawaii's first tree canopy viewer. Just a note that when we refer to canopy, we're talking about the layers of tree leaves, branches, and stems that provide coverage over the ground when viewed from above. So if you were a bird flying over a tree, what you see is the tree's canopy. For our canopy viewer, it covers, all land use types across the state, all islands. It's based on tree canopy data, which is raster 1 meter resolution based on Maxar vivid imagery and LiDAR imagery from a compilation from the years 2013 to 2020. And this is available for download for anyone who wants to use it for their own purposes. Importantly, we also put literally on the map and on the same page with the tree canopy data, socio-demographic and health data, because we know that there is a relationship between tree canopy and these other factors that impact our communities. Next slide. One more. Okay. So here is a list of all the layers that you can see on the tree canopy viewer, the raster data itself. Braden Aki has also done some analyses to help us understand the percent urban canopy cover in designated areas. And the unit of analysis that we have chosen is the census tract, because a lot of this other health, population, and demographic data aligns with that unit of analysis. We include the impervious surface land cover, which has a direct relationship to where you can and can't have trees. We include an ahupua'a layer because that is a boundary that makes sense to a lot of folks and helps us orient ourselves on the landscape. There's population information from census, as well as Native Hawaiian population information, some economic indicators with income, as well as supplemental nutrition and assistance program recipients, some health indicators, asthma, cardiovascular disease, as well as some data that has been generated by our own Ka'ulunani urban and community forestry programs. The citizen forester volunteers have helped with tree inventory data. So that's for parts of Oahu and just getting started on Kauai. And we also have information on areas that are being stewarded by Malama Aina organizations so that all these things can be understood together. Next slide. So what can you do with this tree canopy viewer? So if we all know that trees provide all these benefits, understanding where the canopy is, how much canopy we have can really be important for understanding how to maximize the benefits for all communities. This viewer can help us understand, what does a tree canopy look like? Where is it located? And how does it vary across the landscapes where we live, work, learn, and play? Is the distribution of this canopy equitable? So this tool can be used to help answer these questions, as well as prioritize tree planting and maintenance where it can have the most impact for communities that may be disproportionately burdened by risks that tree cover may help to address. So I just want to share with you a couple screenshots that represent what you'll see when you play around with the viewer. And I encourage you all to do that. Next slide. So here are some different scenarios. On the left are all the different available layers that you can turn off. What we're seeing here is the percent urban tree canopy cover. This is a shot of Waikiki, Kapahulu, and Mo'iliili areas. So we can see the lighter areas like Chinatown, Kaimuki, have lower canopy compared to the darker area at Mauka, which is Tantalus. Next slide, please. Looking at the canopy data set, which shows us exactly where there are and where there aren't trees, we can see that the pattern, which is something that we would expect with more trees up Mauka. Next slide. Thinking about the relationship between trees and heat severity, represented here with this pink layer, is something that's really important for thinking about prioritizing tree care and tree planting. Next slide. And we can also understand the relationship between tree canopy coverage, heat severity, and what we see here are impervious surfaces in gray. So there are a lot of different applications for these data sets. Next slide, please. This is showing us an economic indicator, percent SNAP recipients. The key is there on the right with lower percentages in kind of a turquoise color and higher percentages in brown. Next slide. But what you can see for any of these census tracts is while the key is representing information on SNAP, each place when you click on it has a pop-out information box that gives you all of the layer data for that same geography so that you can understand it in a broader context. Next slide, please. So to promote health and well-being through urban forest, this leading forestry researcher and professor, who's also the director of Nature-Based Solutions Institute, Cecil Koninendich, created this rule of thumb for urban forestry, which is the 3-30-100 rule. I mean, he resisted doing such a thing for a long time because every place is different, but he kept getting asked by government leaders and policymakers to help set these goals. So again, this is a rule of thumb. There is a lot of variation in the world, but I really like this because it's easy to understand, and it also helps us think about urban forest at a scalable level, at the level of trees, at the level of canopy, and at the level of access. So the recommendation is to have 3 trees visible from every home. And there's so much research out there that was really emphasized during COVID times that talks about the importance of being able to see trees or be around trees for mental health and well-being. 30 is the percent tree canopy cover recommended at the neighborhood level to promote cooling, better mental and physical health, and physical activity. So that is the recommendation at the neighborhood level. He actually recommends at the citywide level, there should be even a higher canopy cover when possible. And then 300 meters from the nearest park or green space, that's about 328 yards. Hawaii does fairly well in this, with many of our major cities being less than a 10-minute walk to a park. So we're doing fairly well there, but the tree canopy viewer allows us to consider how we're doing with regard to that percent tree canopy cover at different scales. Next slide. So for example, well, here's another target. 3 years before the 3-30-300 rule, our own mayor in Honolulu in 2018, or rather the city council passed this resolution to have the goal of 35% tree canopy cover by the year 2035. And so, as I said, we can use the viewer data to see how we're doing. Next slide. And what we're able to see is that actually 84% of our residents statewide live in places with less than 30% canopy. So most of us don't live in neighborhoods that have what is regarded in many places to be adequate or recommended levels of canopy. Next slide. Looking specifically at Honolulu County, we can see that 93% of residents live in areas with less than the 30% urban canopy coverage. And this analysis can be done, for any county. At this time, Maui, Kauai, and Hawaii counties don't have the urban tree canopy percentage goals as has been set in Honolulu, but I'm in conversation with folks in planning, and they're really excited to be able to use the tree canopy viewer to make informed decisions about how to set those goals. Next slide, please. On this chart, we can see that actually for all the counties, there are significant populations that are living in places that have less than the recommended 30% canopy coverage. Next slide. And if we kind of extend this metaphor to think of our schools as communities or neighborhoods of their own, Braden did some analyses to look at all public schools and then going out a half mile from each of the schools as a buffer, assuming that hopefully kids still walk to school in some places. and found that 70% of our schools actually are in places that, again, have less than 30% canopy cover. And if you just look at elementary school areas, it's even higher. So a lot of potential there to improve things for our kids, to get safe routes to schools and have healthier learning environments. Next slide, please. So those are some examples that you can pull out, understand sort of at the statewide level, at the county level, but you can also use the viewer to understand things at the neighborhood level. So here we see that in Mo'ili'ili Macaulay neighborhood of Honolulu, it's quite built, a lot of impervious surface you see there. Tree canopy cover is less than 7%. Next slide. In the adjacent community, Manoa Woodlawn, canopy cover is over 20%. So there are definitely differences across the landscape. Next slide. And we see those differences manifest not only with regard to tree canopy cover, but the neighborhood with more tree canopy cover also has better economic indicators and better health indicators as well, compared to an area with lower tree canopy that has some economic and health challenges comparatively. And this is something that's coming out to be a really strong trend on the continent, certainly relevant here in Hawaii, but we also have something we are just starting to be able to look into and understand is, where are there cases where there are lower economic indicators, and yet there are really high levels of tree canopy cover, things that are counter to some of the patterns that we're seeing on the continent. As we know here, there are, it's a different history of land use and a lot more nuances that need to be understood. Next slide, please. But the important thing is that the viewer really will help us to be strategic, not implementing the same programs in every neighborhood across the state, but really considering how to do that equitably and how to prioritize communities where tree planting and maintenance can have the most impact. Next slide, please. So this is a relatively new tool, the Tree Canopy Viewer. I'll encourage you all to explore it. I also want you to know that we're going to be supporting some Tree Canopy Viewer fellows coming up. Starting August through mid-September, we'll be accepting applications so that students can explore the relationship between urban tree canopy and public health, or heat island, environmental justice, urban waters, traditional management, or really all kinds of things that we haven't even considered yet. So we're excited for that. Please help us spread the word. Next slide. And how do you access the Tree Canopy Viewer? You can find it through our own Ka'ulunani website. From the front page, you just scroll down to the bottom and it'll provide a link that will take you directly to the Tree Canopy Viewer. There's directions on how to navigate it there, as well as a video tutorial that we created. So with that, I will say thank you, last slide, and be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Heather and Braden. This is just a remarkable tool. I immediately, once it came out, which is just out, I took a deep dive in it, and it's got so much information, and the mapping is really unbelievable. And it really does allow you to be strategic, as Heather was saying, about number one, the fact that we really don't have as many trees as we think we do here in Hawaii, and number two, that there's obvious differences between neighborhoods, and great opportunity to try to rectify that a little bit. Okay, commissioners, any questions on this? Scott. Yeah, can you?
Chair, Scott Glenn, Energy Office for DBED. I just wanted to note, Heather, thank you. That was really interesting. And the 330-300 is a useful rubric and way to think about it. And I know when you talked about the kind of neighborhood distribution of trees, I'm curious, have you done that environmental justice equity look of the 330-300% matched up with Honolulu or some of the other urban areas, neighborhoods with the equity layers, or maybe even what Leia's been working on with the equity mapping project?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We haven't had the capacity to dig into that. I mean, to really understand, especially that three trees visible from a household requires really on the ground work beyond, I think. Maybe it could be done with the viewer. I don't know. Maybe this is something that a tree canopy viewer fellow could really dig into. What we're really excited about is that we're able to offer this tool and the information so that people can explore these things in more detail. We have been doing some different kinds of analyses, just getting started really, as this is a really new tool, but the potential to do that is there. So we're really excited about that. And also we recognize that there are other important data sets that engage with or might relate to tree canopy that we didn't include here. So again, the data is downloadable for anyone to use for their own purposes. If you're interested, for example, in improving multimodal transportation, you want to know where trees are on walkways and on bicycle paths because people like to get around in the shade rather than in the direct sun. So if you have the layers for those pathways, then you can look at the relationship of tree canopy to those layers, those places, for example, which I know is a priority for our physical activity and nutrition plan from Department of Health. So there's a lot of opportunity to look at the environmental justice aspects and go beyond, look at health and more. So thanks for the question.
And if I could just add, I'm going to put in a plug for the university, the Lava Lab and the Data Science Institute might also be an interesting resource for you guys to look at visualizing and doing maybe some of that in-depth analytics to pull out maybe Google Maps data or something else to try to get at some of those.
Thank you.
Okay, Chair Lowen.
Thanks. I just wanted to say thanks. That's really fascinating. I want to take a closer look at it. I'm wondering if you can just say again for the commission members and people who might be watching online where they can access the tool.
Sure. I will put it in the chat. Is that okay?
Yeah, and I guess if it's online somewhere, if people are watching this back on YouTube or something, they won't be able to see the chat, but is it on the DLNR website? Or?
Yeah, so on DLNR, our urban and community forestry page, Ka'ulunani, it's a really long address, which we have a redirect. If you go ka'ulunani.org, it will take you to the address that I put in the chat. And from that front page, you can scroll down and get the link to the viewer.
I just put Hawaii tree viewer in Google and it came up.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you so much. And thanks so much. This is great.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Okay, thanks. Any other commissioner questions? All right, any public testimony on this? All right, seeing none, thank you so much again, Heather and Braden. This was very fascinating.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks again to Braden for all the great work he's done on this. Aloha.
Very good. All right, commissioners, we're going to move on to item 7, informational presentation on coastal erosion. And for this, I am very happy to introduce the new administrator for the DLNR Office of Conservation and Coastal Lands, Michael Kane. Michael is a 17 or so year veteran of OCCL, and so we're very lucky to have him take over, filling the very big shoes of Sam Lemo, and he'll carry us into the future. And he was going to be joined by Justine Nehe probably in this section, but she's out sick today, so Michael is going to do this presentation on coastal erosion. Michael?
All right, thank you, Chair. It's an exciting opportunity. Good afternoon, commissioners. What I would like to do is give you guys a 10-minute overview of life on the front lines of adapting to climate change. Yeah, I want to give you guys perspective for the challenges we face. I want to review the tools that we currently have to address coastal erosion, and maybe close off with some of the tools I wish I had that we don't have. Two things to understand. We mostly know this. Shorelines are dynamic in Hawaii. Sandy beaches accrete and erode naturally. A lot of the issues that we've seen recently were inevitable by building too close to dynamic shorelines. These problems aren't a surprise. What we are seeing is that the erosion has accelerated in part thanks to coastal erosion, and thanks to rising seas. We've set a couple records in the past 3 or 4 years for high tides. A lot of these are due to regional anomalies, perhaps 10% we can track to climate change. The problem is these regional anomalies, they'll fade, they'll cycle, but the rising seas are going to just continue steadily up, currently at a rate of about 4 centimeters per year, which means that the records we've been setting the past couple of years will become the new norm. Every shoreline is different. In general, the big swells that we have bring sand into the system. And then it's the high tides that take sand out. And then throughout the winter, throughout the summer, we'll see lateral transport, sand shifting up or down a beach. And that's important, and I'll touch. I think there's a lot of misconceptions with that. One of the things that big swells do is, they bring the sand into the system, they restock the nearshore berm, and then as the tides come in, that berm can then replenish the beach. What happens when we build on that berm is we lock that sand into place, and like we interrupt that natural flow of accretion and erosion. And so I have multiple pages to look through. And basically we find that the shoreline hardening is really destructive for beach processes. Boom, boom, boom. So the two main tools we've had historically to address erosion have been shoreline hardening and beach restoration. Hardening has been the most common. We now know that shoreline hardening is destructive to beach processes. On Oahu, approximately 25% of our beaches have been lost or severely narrowed thanks to hardening. And the hardening impacts beaches in a number of ways. Like I mentioned, it locks, this inland berm, it can lock that into place and prevent the shoreline from being renourished during high tides. The refraction can create a high energy environment where sand is no longer deposited on the shore. That's what we see in parts of Waikiki and a lot of West Maui, where the shoreline has eroded to a point where it hits, a seawall, and then we have a systemic collapse where the beach stops accreting, and we're just faced with a hard, ugly wall, no beach. Shoreline or seawalls also impact lateral transport, the movement of sand up and down throughout the seasons along the beach, and it can create flanking. If one property hardens the shoreline, then you will see increased erosion to their neighbors, who then would proceed with shoreline hardening. 2020, the legislature did pass Act 16, which prohibited the construction of private shoreline hardening structures, such as seawalls and revetments, at sites having sand beaches. So that's a law that we support. We think it's a step in the right direction. Last winter was the first time where we had to deal with the repercussions of that law. One of the, and by repercussions, let me talk through this. Our office has historically issued permits for temporary shoreline hardening structures, these sand bag burritos that you'll see on the North Shore, parts of Maui, parts of Hawaii. The idea was they would go in place for 2 to 3 years while property owners develop plans to retreat or come up with another form of mitigation. Those permits have now expired. We know that these sandbag burritos, if they remain in place, become de facto shoreline hardening devices. And now we have this new law that prohibits private shoreline hardening. I'm choosing my words carefully here because we are in court with a number of landowners, and I don't want to engage in ex parte communication or jeopardize any of the violations we are currently pursuing.
Michael, you're breaking up a little bit, so you might want to.
Sorry. I was saying I was choosing my words carefully because I don't want to jeopardize any violations, and hence I was fading out. I will note this. Currently, we are at the risk of having our coastal policy determined by the judiciary as a result of litigation. And I would suggest that developing policy or letting courts develop policy is probably a bad way to make any kind of policy. We've also, so shoreline hardening, it's still allowed to protect infrastructure such as highways. And based upon the applications we're seeing, it still seems to be the preferred choice by Department of Transportation, Parks departments, etc. Second approach we can take is to engage in beach nourishment and beach restoration. Waikiki is the most significant example of this. Beginning in 1939 and proceeding through the 1950s, we estimate that approximately 300,000 cubic yards of sand was placed in Waikiki. It is a man-made environment. Much of that sand nourishment or sand placement was uncoordinated and haphazard. There were places where it remained, there were places where it washed away. By 2010, most of central Waikiki, the main tourist beach, had washed away. Our office, along with WebCETA, the Waikiki Beach Special Improvement District, led a project to do a large-scale nourishment project in Waikiki. In 2012, we placed 24,000 cubic yards of sand on the beach. In 2021, we followed up with 20,000 cubic yards. From our perspective, that nourishment was a huge success. Our most recent studies show that the beach is actually accreting now. It is 37 feet wider than it was pre-nourishment, and there are 65,000 square feet of additional dry beach. What is interesting is that among the public, they consider it a failure. And I quite often talk to people who will tell me that the beach just washed away and that we wasted our money. I've had people standing on the beach tell me that the beach had washed away. So that is a frustration that our office deals with. This, your difference in perception than what we see and what the public believes happened. Second big nourishment project was Iroquois Point, and this is at the mouth of Pearl Harbor. Eva Basin, if you fly over and look out the plane windows, you'll see these T-head groins jutting out into the ocean. That was a federal project. It did not go through DLNR review. They brought in 90,000 cubic yards of sand, removed 16 beach homes, and placed 9 T-head groins in the shoreline to hold the sand in. The T-head groins, I would recommend the commission members, if they have a chance, visit Iroquois Point to see what they look like. The groins are designed to mimic natural headlands and to trap the beach in. They are effective. It does change the shoreline. We anticipate that we will be seeing applications and proposals in the future to place these groins in many hotspots around the island, particularly in Waikiki and in West Maui. They work, they change the beach. It's going to be a tough decision to make when we have to make that decision. Do we support these or not? The big pros of beach nourishment is that it works. We've learned a lot. Our modeling over the past 20 years has been accurate. We know how to place sand on a beach. We know how to design a beach. We know what structures are needed should we want that beach to remain in place. There are some limitations to beach nourishment. Big one is funds. It is expensive to bring in sand from the offshore environment. There is very limited sand inland that we can bring in. A lot of the inland sand sources contain Hawaiian cultural artifacts and are basically not appropriate to be mined, to be placed on the beach. We're finding that beach nourishment is controversial among some members of the community. They feel we do this for tourists and not for, general Hawaiian residents. And they want retreat. And that's something we hear over and over. Like, why are you nourishing the beach? Why don't you make the condos pull back? That is a challenge for our office. DLNR, our kuleana is over the conservation district and the lands makai of the shoreline. Retreat involves urban lands, which are in the county jurisdiction. And that's one of the policy challenges I'm hoping that Mary Alice's project work, the Shoreline Regional Management Study, will address. Like, how do we bridge this gap when we have, different jurisdictions with the same environmental issue? Variations on beach nourishment. It is possible to do sand pushing to protect properties temporarily. Sand pushing is when there's excess sand in the system, such as near a river mouth, and you just bulldoze it in front of a property. That works for a week or it works for a season. It's not a long-term solution. And there's been a lot of talk about dune restoration. Obviously, that is something our office, DLNR, would support. The challenge with that is we have development on top of the dunes that we would need to restore. So we would look to the commission or to our policymakers to basically help us develop plans to retreat so that we can restore the shoreline areas. And I said 10 minutes, that was 15 minutes. I apologize for running fast through that. I'm here for any questions.
Thanks so much, Michael Kane. That was a fascinating summary of what's happening in coastal erosion in Hawaii. All right, commissioners, questions. I have one question, Michael, just to kick it off. Your comment that T-groins do change the beach. Do you mean aesthetically?
Yeah, correct. I'm thinking aesthetically. Our engineers tell us they're removable, but realistically, they're big. It's a permanent change to the beach, in my eyes. So what they do is they're designed to mimic a natural cove. So when we place sand on the beach, it traps the sand in that cove. So those of you who are familiar with Waikiki, you'll notice that the places where the sand is in place is often held in place by the redesigned Hawaiian groin or held in place by the Diamond Head and Kuhio basins. There are structures that lock that sand in. There are places like Anapali on Maui, where our studies show that there's enough sand in the system that you can do beach nourishment without needing structures. But there are other studies for other beaches that show nourishment just either won't work without structures, or I should add, there are places where we have such a high energy environment, like Ha'ena, like North Shore of Oahu, that any nourishment that we could do would be taken away by one single winter swell. So there are limitations. It's not appropriate for the entire island.
Thank you for that. Chair Lowen.
Hi, yes, you just kind of started touching on it. I guess I just was going to ask, since the commission last met, there was a major event or a few major events, I can't remember the timing exactly, on the North Shore. You started to sort of comment about the North Shore just at the end of what you were responding to Chair Case. But do you have further comment on that, I guess, and what maybe lessons for the commission or big takeaway thoughts on what happened?
So yeah, that was when I started fading out and the chair took note. Our office alleges that there are 50 potential conservation district use violations on the North Shore. And because we are a regulatory agency, I need to be careful in addressing North Shore outside of, bringing the formal violation in front of a judge or in front of the board. So my apologies. I have a lot to say. I just can't say it.
Okay, but that's okay if you can't say it. I understand. And maybe we can revisit that question when you've had a chance to clarify what you can and can't say, but appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I can provide.
I had the chance to go down to Waikiki during the king tide last week with Michael right at the height of the tide, and it was really remarkable. Number one, how high the water is, coming right up to the walkway and over the walkway, and in many cases on the Alawai Harbor side of Waikiki, and that the Royal Hawaiian groin, there was a lot of sand there in front of there. So it was that sea groin replaced an older one. So it didn't really change the status quo there, I guess, in terms of, but it repaired it. And there's a lot of beach there, but right next to it where there isn't any, it's pretty well washed away, at least at the high tide with some surf and king tides there. Okay, who else? Anyone else? Questions for Michael Kane? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much for that overview, Michael. That is really helpful. Do we have any public comments on this? And I see none. All right, thank you, Michael, very much, and we'll look forward to your continuing work on this. That is a very great lead-in to our guest speaker today, Ben Hamilton, who is a research scientist with JPL NASA, and is going to give us a review and a discussion of new science on projected sea level rise, and is calling in from several time zones ahead of us, so we really appreciate you hanging in for the day, an extended day, and hand it over to you for letting us know what's happening now and on the horizon.
Great, thanks. And you can maybe see from the sunlight on my camera here, it's not too late in the day. I'm here on the West Coast in Pasadena, California. I do not have sharing capability. I think I maybe need to be made co-host. I apologize, that was done previously, but I had to back out and get back in.
Try that.
Got it. All right. Perfect. Okay. So I will apologize in advance. It is dinner time here, however, and I do have 2 kids running around who may interrupt me, but if you hear some noise in the background, I apologize. So today I want to give a brief overview of this recent report that came out, this interagency report, just a 10-minute overview. I do want to say I appreciate the invite to come speak to you and kind of explain some of the updates that were made in this report. I'm not going to go into real detail about where this report comes from other than what's right here on this slide. So these are scenarios that get produced by the federal agencies. I sit here at NASA. NASA plays a particular role within this, what we call the Interagency Task Force. You can see the full name there. It's long, I won't read through it, but we typically call ourselves the Interagency Task Force or the Sea Level Task Force. And it's made up of scientists from a number of different agencies. Billy Sweet was the other lead author along with me, but then we have a whole host of other people that were involved and contributed to this report. So again, I'm going to give an overview of this report and what's contained in it and why it's what it in the report is relevant for you all there in Hawaii. All right. So just to get straight into it, this report builds off of a 2017 report. So in 2017, this task force produced a report that provided scenarios for the U.S. coastlines, including Hawaii, out to 2150, and we're really using that as our starting point. So here on the left, so this is one slide, kind of giving an overview of what I'm going to cover in this presentation, but really I'll go into detail on these as I go forward. So in terms of what's in this report and what I'll cover here today, we have the updated scenarios for the US, both on a 1-degree grid and also at the local level, so individual tide gauges. And these extend from 2020 all the way out to 2150. We've also included trajectories of sea level rise. So these are based on observations that we have of tide gauges going from 2020 out to 2050. So focusing on this near-term time period. And then we also have extreme water probabilities out to 2050. So that's the second half of the report. I was the lead author in the first half. That's what I'm going to cover here today, just in the interest of time. And I think really it's those scenarios, those projections that are of most immediate interest, at least in what was indicated to me. So in terms of what's new, the scenarios are really just updated using the science from the IPCC 6 assessment report. So we're not diverging from the underlying science that's within that report, really leveraging all the work that was done there and then building off of it and kind of focusing on here in the US. The extreme scenario from that 2017 report has been removed. So I'll explain what that is, I think on the next slide, and what that exactly means. We do have this comparison of the models and the tide gauges and the observations that we've added this time, just to give a little additional information about the projections that we're providing. And then we really drill into this near-term time period. So we have an increased focus on this time period from 2020 to 2050. And again, I'll explain what that means on these next couple slides. All right, so what are the sea level rise scenarios? So some of you may be familiar with this from the 2017 report, and we use a similar framing here. But these scenarios are really intended to cover the plausible range of future global sea level rise. So we're not tied directly to like the emissions pathways and warming levels that are in the IPCC that you may be familiar with. Here, we're really just trying to span, based on the underlying science, what are the possible amounts of sea level rise we could see in 2100. And we come up with 5 of these different scenarios. So from low to high. You can see in the parentheses there's a particular value. So that's the amount of global sea level rise you would get by 2100 at those different levels. So we go from 30 centimeters all the way up to 2 meters. I'll speak mostly in feet throughout this presentation, but for just this one slide, I'll use meters here. But even though we're using this scenario framing, we still do have this context or these storylines attached to each of these scenarios. So if we're talking about the low scenario, that's really a low emissions and low warming future. As we get into the intermediate low, that's more emissions. We're incorporating some of the possibilities for higher emissions, higher warming. You'll notice that column on the right, this possibility of rapid ice sheet loss. So this is really something that has shifted from the last report to this report. There's been improved, let's say improved modeling of what might happen with the Antarctic ice sheet. And as a result, we tried to capture that improved modeling and what those models are saying within these scenarios. So as we start to move through the intermediate high, and high scenarios, that's where we start to consider that possibility of rapid ice sheet loss. So it's a little bit different. It's not just considering differences in warming, it's considering processes that we're still not entirely certain about, but could happen and could be triggered that would then lead to a lot of sea level rise. So within those top 3 scenarios, we're really exploring that space, that rapid ice sheet loss possibilities. So we end up with 5 scenarios from low to high, so 30 centimeters to 2 meters. In the previous report, there was an extreme scenario, so 2.5 meters by 2100. Exactly because of those updates to the underlying modeling, that 2.5 meters is no longer considered scientifically plausible by 2100. But you'll see in the later slides here that 2.5 meters is possible after 2100. So it's really just that high amount of sea level rise has been pushed further into the future. All right, so to get into some of the results here, and that's really what the rest of my presentation will focus on, I'm going to give a couple slides here on focusing on the contiguous United States, which I know is particularly not relevant for you all in Hawaii, but just as some summary statements and some framing before drilling down into more local projections. But in general, the sea level in the US is expected to rise between 10 and 12 inches in the next 30 years. And that's about equal to the rise that we've seen in the past 100 years. So from 1920 to 2020. And I mentioned previously that we have these observation trajectories. So really, we're just trying to assess what path the observations are on, extending those out to 2050, and then comparing back to these modeled scenarios. And you see for the contiguous US that we end up tracking pretty close to the intermediate low to intermediate scenario. So based on our current pathway out to 2050, before some of these more uncertain processes kick in, we're on this intermediate, these kind of mid-range trajectory based on where we are now. An important thing with this report, because again, a lot of this ties back to those updated models on the ice sheets, because we've pushed those possibilities further out into the future, we actually have a narrower range in the near term. So out in 2050, we have a narrower range than what we had in the previous report. So there's a little more certainty in the amount of sea level rise that we'd expect to see in 2050 compared to that 2017 report. That's true for the contiguous United States. That's true for each location across the globe. So each of these global or say kind of US averaged scenarios have a similar storyline locally. So for the Hawaiian Islands, for instance. So we really have this narrower range in the near term, and then this these observations that are kind of bisecting that range. So it just gives us a little better information this near term time period, which is really, that's why we focused on it within this, this report. All right, so next, as we go out beyond 2100, you can see here on the right, again, this is for the contiguous US, that as we go out beyond 2050, that left side of that graph there, you can see this fanning out of the scenarios. And it fans out pretty rapidly. So as you get past 2050, when those scenarios are pretty compressed, you see that they start to diverge pretty dramatically, particularly so in 2150. So our range in 2100 is 2 to 7 feet between low and high. Our range in 2150 is 2.5 to 12 feet. Okay, so I said previously that 2.5 meter, that extreme scenario was not evaluated as possible or plausible by 2100, but as you extend beyond 2100, you don't have to go too much further out to reach that 2.5 meters. So we've kind of just shifted the timeline forward based on the updated modeling. And importantly here, these ranges are really associated with future emissions and the response of the Earth systems. So if we limit warming in the future, for instance, we really take some of those higher scenarios off the table. So those rapid ice sheet loss scenarios are really only plausible in the event of very high warming amounts. So if we limit warming, then we can start to not have to consider the high, intermediate, high scenarios quite as much. Certainly if we kind of maintain the trajectory we're on, and there's this possibility of rapid ice sheet loss, that's where those higher scenarios come into play. Okay. So one last slide before I show some results here for the specific to Hawaii. So here I'm basically adding storylines to these different scenarios. So I know there's a lot going on in this table, but I'm showing here the percentage or the likelihood, the probability of exceeding these different scenarios, low to high, under different warming levels in the future. All right, so if we keep to 1.5 degrees C, you can see exactly what I said, that intermediate, high, and high scenarios become very unlikely. And actually in that warming feature, that high scenario, the probability is almost zero, right? We're just not triggering those low confidence processes based on our scientific understanding. We're not going to reach that high scenario. On the other hand, as you go to higher amounts of warming, that's when you start to see some of these higher scenarios come into play. So at 5 degrees C by 2100, again, you bring the intermediate high more into play. And then that last column there, that's where we factor in those low confidence processes. So if those low confidence processes, and again, I want to reiterate, there's uncertainty in whether those will happen and how they will proceed if they do happen. But if those types of rapid ice sheet loss scenarios are triggered, that's where you start to bring in the intermediate high and high scenarios. Okay, so this is really just to give a little extra context to those different scenarios and the likelihood associated with them. All right, so to finish up, I have 2 or 3 slides focusing in on the scenarios for the Hawaiian Islands. So what I'm going to show here is an averaged scenario or average numbers across the Hawaiian Islands. We actually have scenarios for each of the individual tide gauges along the islands and also a grid around the islands. But here, just for the ease of presentation, I'm kind of showing the average of these. But you can see here the scenario ranges relative to the year 2000. So in 2050, we're looking at about 0.6 to 1.5 feet, 2100, 1.2 to 8 feet. And then in 2150, we have about 1.7 to 14 feet. So that's really where you start to bring in those higher possibilities as you go out to 2150. I showed you that example with the observations previously for the contiguous US. It's a similar story here for the Hawaiian Islands. Our observations that we have locally here in this region are tracking, let's say, roughly the intermediate low. There is an uncertainty associated with that. So we're kind of capturing that intermediate to intermediate low range out to 2050. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And just to show some numbers here, but prior to this presentation, it was communicated to me that there are particular target values for 2050 and 2100 that are currently in use for Hawaii. And I'm just showing the updates here across the different scenarios from low to high. If I remember correctly, the number for 2050 was kind of in between the intermediate low and intermediate scenarios based on the update here. Whereas the 2100 value, I think, was close to the intermediate. Someone probably knows this better on the call than I do, but just out of memory, that's about what we're tracking. So we're in that intermediate low to intermediate range, I think, based on the numbers that were used previously and based on this update here. I want to show one other way of looking at this to really hammer home some of these messages. So underlying the scenarios, when we actually compute these, we're looking at the individual processes that contribute to sea level rise. So we're really regionalizing these. We're looking at the important factors for Hawaii in this case and what is really causing sea level to change and what we expect to cause sea level to change in the future. So here again on the bottom left, I'm showing low to high and stacking up the contributions from all these different processes. So you have the Greenland ice sheet, Antarctic ice sheet, stereodynamic sea level is like changes in ocean currents and also thermal expansion. So as the ocean warms, it expands. We do also include vertical land motion. So if subsidence is occurring, we're capturing that as well. But in 2050, you can see kind of equal contributions across the scenarios for these different processes. But the story is quite different. And one other point here, the range between the scenarios is pretty narrow from about 0.6 feet to 1.2 feet. As we go up to 2100, the story is quite a bit different. So you have this expanded range, and related to what I was talking about with this modeling, the Antarctic ice sheet and the possibility for rapid ice sheet loss, it is a big driver of these future scenarios. So what is going to happen? And Antarctica is really driving, say, the range between low all the way up to high. So that's a really big contributor. Some of you may have heard of something called ice sheet fingerprints. So when ice is lost from a particular source, say the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet, that water doesn't fill up the ocean as a bathtub. It kind of goes with particular patterns. And the way it works out is that the further you are away from the source of ice that's being lost, the more sea level rise you feel from it. So if you're really close to it, you actually see a little bit less sea level rise than you would if you're really far away from it. In Hawaii, you're obviously quite far away from both the Antarctic ice sheet and also the Greenland ice sheet. So you really do get pretty big impacts in some of these futures, these higher scenarios from those ice sheets. So yeah, the ice sheets are a very important driver for future sea level rise in these scenarios for the Hawaiian Islands. All right, and just to finish up here, last slide. Some of the summary messages and the bigger takeaways. The extreme scenario has been removed. Again, this is really just based on improved understanding of what might happen with the ice sheet. So modeling continues to advance. There's been a lot of progress since that 2017 report. We've tried to capture it here. And as a result, that extreme scenario has been removed. There's also a smaller range between the scenarios in the near term. I think I showed that. And this really provides, I mean, again, a smaller range, less uncertainty, and more confidence in what sea level is going to be. That's just better information that we can provide to those that actually need to implement this information and planning. So that's really just going out to 2050. We have a better understanding of what sea level rise might look like. And then along with that, that additional support from the observations that we see as we go out to 2050 is really important. And then the last point here, there is rapid divergence of the scenarios beyond 2100. Those future emissions, future warming possibilities really come into play. That's where it becomes very critical that we limit emissions, for instance, to keep these higher scenarios off the table. But I don't want to convey the message that because we have this narrower range in 2050 and less of a range between low and high, that these scenarios and the possibilities for warming in the future are not really an important driving factor here. And then I think if these slides are distributed, just a couple points to access the data. So NOAA has a number of services that they provide, which I'm pointing to here. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of these. On the NASA side at sealevel.nasa.gov, we also have created a simple delivery tool to provide these scenarios as well. So you can go again and click on Hawaii. Unfortunately, is blocked by this kind of drop down, but it is behind there. You can go and interact with the data there as well. And then, contact information. Billy and I field a lot of questions on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions both now and then going forward in the future. But I will leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hamilton. That's fascinating information and really, really important and valuable information. I am going to ask commissioners if you have any questions. I'm going to kick it off with one, if you don't mind. So when you have the scenarios using the 2000 baseline, here we are in 2020, so are we approximately 2/5 into that figure, or is it not evenly spaced? So if it goes up to 1.5 feet, we would be at about, I don't know, a little over half a foot sea level rise compared to 2000.
That's a really good question. And that's actually where these observation extrapolations, these trajectories I talked about factor in. So the scenarios, the models are all kind of referenced back to 2005 and the IPCC, and then back to 2000 in this report. That's to provide consistent information with what is currently used in planning and what was used in that 2017 report. So we provide similar numbers now, but regionally and within the report and some of those tools I just showed for accessing, you can actually look at the amount of sea level rise that has occurred from 2000 to 2020, see if the models have been reflecting the actual observed sea level. In some cases, they have not. So for instance, in the Eastern Gulf, we've actually seen increased sea level relative to where the models pick up. But again, that's information we provide within the report. It is somewhat challenging to pull out that background sea level rise that we're trying to capture with these scenarios from the observations, but we did make an effort within this report.
Thanks very much. Okay, Luke Myers.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate the presentation. And maybe this is a little off the sea level tied to this, but like we've seen with some of the models with the Gulf Stream and glacial deposit runoff in the Atlantic, and I think you mentioned this in one of the inputs here for sea level rise in Hawaii, but are there any inferences as you project out to 2100 that either the global conveyor belt in the Pacific or in the North Pacific will be disrupted in Antarctica, which would have kind of a little bit of weather impacts? Is that too much of a correlation based on this information?
No, it's a good question. So the stereodynamic piece, that kind of ocean dynamic piece, comes from the CMIP6 set of models. And some of those processes are captured in some of the models, but really those processes are to the extent we're currently able to model them, are going to be captured on our uncertainty ranges. So I think it's important, especially in the ocean dynamics, and like you were talking about the Gulf Stream on the east coast of the US, it's really important we continue to advance our understanding to narrow those ranges and those possibilities and to understand what will happen in the future. So yeah, the shorter answer to your question is that kind of information will be captured most likely in the uncertainty ranges around a given scenario, as opposed to within the actual scenario itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Scott Glenn.
Thank you, Chair Case. Aloha, Ben. Thanks for the presentation. Had a comment and a question. Comment first is just to distinguish our sea level rise viewer that the state of Hawaii has. I think when you're looking at our viewer, there's also embedded in there coastal erosion and the high wash of the wave flooding. So if people are looking and comparing, that's a difference in, I think, what you presented and what we're showing in that. So we're kind of looking at two different numbers in that viewer. Then the question, I think most of your presentation was focused around the low intermediate range with the assumption around a 1.5 degree. And I think IPCC and the global conversation has really been the 3 to 4 degree range is what we're realistically on a path for. And 1.5 is very much at just an aspirational goal at this point. And could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the factors like you highlighted with the glacier and melt in that 3 to 4 degree range rather than the 1.5?
Are you talking temperature as opposed to feet?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to just throw this one slide back up. So our intermediate and intermediate low scenarios are actually most representative of 3 degrees C. So there's a little bit of I don't know, not a disconnect, but the terminology is a little bit different than what the AR6 is presenting. So within these scenarios, we have 3 of them that are very heavily tied to high warming, high emissions, and that's the intermediate through the high. So if you were looking for kind of the best representation of 3 degrees C, you would look kind of right in this range, this intermediate, low to intermediate. So I think what we're showing here is out to 2050. That is a very consistent storyline. We're tracking intermediate, low to intermediate. That's roughly a 3 degrees C future. So I think that is consistent. Now, when you ask about some of the more uncertain processes that I was talking about, the updated understanding is that those will be triggered potentially only with high warming. So as we get up to say 3, 4, 5 degrees C, that's where those start to become a possibility. Those more uncertain. I think some of you may have heard of the Doomsday Glacier, for instance. Like those kinds of processes and what happens there get triggered at those higher warming levels. So yeah, just if you're looking for an analog to 3 degrees C, you're probably looking at that intermediate, low to intermediate range within this report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions, commissioners, or comments, because this is really about how do we make sure that our policies are focused on the latest science, that we are aimed at solving addressing our local issues resulting from these numbers. Are we aimed at the right numbers?
Chair, if I can maybe just respond to your question. I suggest thinking in terms of no regrets, that, there's a lot of uncertainty, and every time the IPCC and things come out, almost always we're not on the ideal pathway we want to be, and they have to revise things and say, oh, what we thought was the more extreme scenario is now the more likely scenario. Hopefully we'll bend that curve in the future, but right now we're not. And so I guess from my perspective, and certainly when we're looking at critical energy infrastructure, we want to be very careful that we're being more conservative and planning for more sea level rise, more flooding than maybe what the projections might show right now.
And to add one quick comment to that, I mean, I've been asked the question a lot. I mean, how different will these numbers look 5 years from now? Obviously, I can't predict science, but there's a lot of research going into these these ice sheet processes that are still uncertain. So the shift from 2017 to this report was not a small one, and it's possible as modeling continues to advance that you're going to see another shift 5 years from now when this report comes out, especially in that high end. So I within NASA, we're definitely not prescriptive, or I won't tell you what to use, but I think that the read that I will say that it's possible the next set of projections will change.
So, and I think what happened with this shift was the 2050 scenarios got more definite. The range got smaller, but theoretically that could change again. That could change again, right? I mean, you're getting more and better data, so hopefully it wouldn't. But it's still, you know, we might be learning something we don't know right now that would change even that range, right?
Yeah, I think I should separate out. So this near-term time period out to 2050, I mean, we are trying to capture just all the possibilities, and there just aren't processes that we're currently aware of that could really shift us dramatically outside of that range out to 2050. But you don't have to go long after 2050 where you start to increase the uncertainty and the likelihood of this. So that 2050 is it's a nice round number. It's a convenient date 3 decades from now. But again, you can't completely separate that from the discussion and the potential emissions dependence and the shifts that will occur beyond 2050 either.
Other questions or comments, commissioners? All right, is there any public testimony on this item?
Yeah,
Comments
this is,
from anyone?
I'm sorry, I don't see a raise hand feature, so I guess I'll just make some comments. Certainly, obviously, the state of Hawaii is working on the 2017 sea level rise vulnerability and adaptation report, and we're building lots of different policy initiatives to be able to address that report, address the conclusions in that report, and as was indicated earlier in the meeting, there's supposed to be some kind of form of update to that every 5 years. That's within 5 months from now for the 5 years on that report. So it seems like it would be reasonable for the commission to be taking on a task, as was mentioned earlier, maybe with the help of UH or us and or some of the folks, to do some kind of update to that. And that, you know, that's not an easy task. I certainly appreciate that. It was a major effort to get that report prepared over a period of years and put out. So not necessarily suggesting there, you know, the comprehensive update to all the thing, basically starting from scratch. But just a couple of ideas come to mind. One is, again, we're coming up on 5 years. The commission might be able to, well, I would hope the commission would be doing some kind of thinking about how to respond to the 5 year update provisions. A report, information such as Ben's expressing from that or other sources would seem to be one reasonable kind of reality test. Where are we now in 2022, 5 years later than where we were in 2017? What kinds of and be able to put out some messaging, public messaging about that once the commission would come up with some kind of commentary about 2017 versus 2022. I'm certainly with the County of Maui. We've been working with shoreline rules update, trying to implement the sea level rise report for 5 years. We continue, of course, to get pushback from all the property owners who feel their property rights would be impacted by by restricting their ability to continue to do work and develop in what we all know by the report is harm's way. And I find myself saying, and you know, the 2017 report, as well as our shoreline setback rules policy initiatives, are actually are conservative. And I said, you know, hey guys, this is conservative. It's worse than this. So for the commission to be able to come up with some kind of wording, expectations, fairly simple messaging what we would consider to be sea level rise impacts, possible target numbers. Again, 5 years later, which is the sea level rise reports worked on what was the level at 3.2 feet of sea level rise in the years, the time frame for that to occur changed over time. But to come up with some kind of a fairly simplistic, fairly simple messaging of what does that 3.2 feet look like, or what should be, how much worse, so to speak, do we see ourselves now in 2022 versus what we saw ourselves as in 2017, even realizing the work on that report went back a few years ago. So again, I think it'd be good to come up with some kind of overall, what's it look like, kind of a quick and dirty, at least, assessment of what the expected sea level rise is based upon our knowledge and science now versus 5 years ago, come up with some messaging for that, at least simply, and then to also, again, without rewriting the entire report, see what in the report could, with the kind of greatest bang for the buck, take some updating to infuse some of the later, more recent data into key conclusions and policy guidance in the report. So we aren't getting further behind the curve as time goes by. Thank you for letting me make those suggestions.
Thank you. Those are very good comments, and it brings another sort of informational strategy to mind. And Ben, maybe you can see if this is in your report or can be extracted. But basically switching the rise and time axis so that, like, let's say we want to know what's the range of time that a 1 foot sea level rise would be. It'd be anywhere from 2025 to 2035 under your scenario. Can we extract that information?
You can extract that information. Actually, the NASA tool I showed, we're about to release an update that just provides that pre-computed. So someone could go in and compute that themselves, but we will provide that additionally. So you'll have access to exactly that framing. And let's say the next month, we'll have that online and publicly available.
Very good, because that's another part of the messaging is, the sea levels are rising. The question is, one way to look at it is, what's it going to be like by 2050, and we plan accordingly to hit that timeline. But if we want to know, what's our risk that coastal structures will be inundated at a certain point in time, what's that time range possibility? Okay, other questions, comments, commissioners, or any public testimony? Okay, hearing none. Okay, really want to thank you again for working overtime for us today and for that really exceptional information and the work in the report and for translating it to us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for the invite.
Alrighty. Okay, commissioners, our last item on the agenda is, well, actually, breaking news. We have Department of Agriculture has an update. Let's see who's here for Department of Ag. Brian Cow, are you? Do you have an update for on the Department of Agriculture for Climate Commission?
Yeah, hi, this is Brian. I just sent in a chat, just letting you folks know. I apologize for being a little late. So the Department of Ag just wanted to report that it just finished its installation of a 65 kilowatt energy system on our Kamoila vacuum cooling plant. So that's on the Big Island, and we anticipate that it should offset about 70% of the annual cost associated with the energy charges there.
Great, thank you for that very much.
Sure.
Okay, last item on our agenda is the coordinator's update. Turning it over to Leah Lermy, our coordinator.
Hello. Let me just get my Shared here. So hopefully to be a little bit more dynamic, I am going to kind of have a little bit of a tag team presentation today. So I've invited some of our vistas to do some presenting, as well as Kana Otsuka, our VMT specialist. But I will kick things off. Just saying, we've been busy bees over here the past few months between the commission meetings, working on a lot of different projects that I will be sharing with you folks. First of all, if you hadn't had a chance to come in person to our recent Ha'okekai Collection speaker series in collaboration with the University of Hawaii Better Tomorrow speaker series, these talks are available on YouTube. So I encourage you to check them out, especially after our great presentation from Ben today. We had Matthew England come and talk about the ocean as our protector and punisher, so very relevant to the conversations we're having today. Also, as Chair Lowen mentioned at the beginning of the meeting today, Act 185 passed, which is the Hawaii Carbon Smart Land Management Assistant Pilot Program. And I just wanted to share with you folks that this came out of a lot of really hard work from the U.S. Climate Alliance Hawaii Natural and Working Lands Research Team. This program is set to incentivize carbon sequestration activities through incentive contracts that provide compensation for eligible practices. Some of these practices include invasive species control, afforestation, interplanting enrichment, harvesting methods, fire breaks, nutrient management, and erosion control. Just a few of the different activities that are identified. But this has put, the Natural and Working Lands Research Team put a lot of effort into this. It was a few years in the making, worked in the collaboration with a lot of stakeholders throughout the state and talking about what some of the barriers for implementing some climate smart practices on the lands are, and really focusing on soil health and conservation. So we're really excited about this program being established, and looking forward to working with different folks on implementing it. Kick it over to Kiana.
Hi, Leah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Aloha mai kako. My name is Kiana Otsuka. I am the Vehicle Miles Traveled and Active Transportation Specialist with the Hawai'i State Energy Office. I wanted to give you folks a quick update on where we are with the Oahu Mobility Hub study. So this is a study that is being funded by an Oahu Metropolitan Planning Organization grant in collaboration with the Hawaii Department of Transportation, as well as the Climate Commission. So this study evaluates potential locations for mobility hubs on Oahu. So a mobility hub is a place where people can connect with multiple modes of transportation in one shared location. It provides a physical space for the integration of multiple modes like RPT bike share, scooter share, the bus, or car share like Drive Hui. And so this study will conduct a parking inventory of state facilities as well as a utilization analysis. It'll also develop classifications and evaluation criteria for site selection. And then finally, it creates some implementation strategies to help us pilot potential mobility hubs on Oahu with the goal of helping to create safer and more enjoyable transportation options. And so where the study is we have finished writing the scope of work. So we're really kind of getting into the work this month. The study will take about a year, and I hope to come back to you folks and report sort of our findings and where we'd like to recommend some mobility hubs on Oahu. That's all for me. I'm happy to give you folks updates as we go, and I'm available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Oh, Kiana. Any quick questions on the mobility hub study? I can't see anybody, so just jump on in.
Jump in if you have a question. Okay, keep going.
Okay, I'll keep going, and I will pass it off to Amanda Ho, who is one of our Climate Ready Hawaii Vistas.
I'm doing the
shoot, sorry. This is Riviere.
Thank you, Leah. So it was raised in the last commission meeting that there is a need for a clearinghouse on existing climate vulnerability resources. It was discussed that while many state and county agencies are conducting climate vulnerability assessments, that there isn't a coordinated effort. The lack of coordinated efforts can lead to a duplication of efforts, an inability to determine a statewide standard for assessment, and create conflicting messages to those using various information and systems created. Vulnerability assessments are often utilized to develop projects, validate project funding needs, and inform legislation. The Commission, in coordination with HAIMA, has collaborated in drafting an initial white paper in the hopes of developing a climate vulnerability clearinghouse. The document outlines the needs, importance, and benefits of a clearinghouse, which is designed to increase access and reduce the time it takes to find climate vulnerability resources. We are seeking input from the Commission members and departments about how to move forward with this clearinghouse, as we really do believe that input from multiple stakeholders will increase the value of the clearinghouse overall. I'll be providing a link to the clearinghouse shortly, which will also be available on the Commission website, and you can provide feedback to Leah, who will relay it to the team working on the project. Thank you.
So just to add to that, so next steps, we're asking for feedback from you folks by August 19th. And, you know, once we get some feedback and have a final draft of the white paper, you know, we'll be looking for funding to implement this project. So we're pretty excited about it. Been working really closely with the HAIMA folks. Thank you, Luke, for making that connection. And yeah, looking forward to all your comments, because I know at the previous meeting there was a lot of interest in working on this. Any questions or comments? Okay. And next, now we have Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda. I'm the Community Engagement Vista out of the Hawaii State Energy Office, and wanted to share a little bit about the beach restoration project the Climate Commission is coordinating, or the feasibility assessment. So the Climate Change Commission, in coordination with DLNR's OCCL, the Department of Transportation, and Sea Grant, is contracting out Sea Engineering to perform a feasibility assessment of nature-based solutions to erosion and sea level impacts at Punaluu Beach Park in Oahu. So you can see on the figure in the left, shoreline erosion has narrowed the beach park such that the shoreline vegetation is within 50 feet or less of the Kamehameha Highway, threatening both the highway and the community beach park. And so this park has been identified as a key location for a demonstration project. We can protect critical infrastructure by restoring and expanding a natural resource in the beach park that also serves communities that use the park, as well as improve ecological resources. So on Tuesday, a team of us took a site visit out to Ka'ava and Punaluu beach parks. And one of the main takeaways from participants in that site visit was that there was a very clear juxtaposition in the situations between Ka'ava and Punaluu. Ka'ava, the beach was highly eroded and the situation was a little bit more dire in terms of threatening the highway, such that revetments were prioritized to protect the highway, which Michael had discussed in his presentation, the issues of, versus Punaluu Beach Park, where although there was very clear signs of erosion, there's still time, and it's a viable location for beach restoration as a strategy. And in interviews with park representatives, both parks were very well trafficked during peak recreational hours, despite the erosion, making these very important resources for people. So as part of this feasibility assessment, the state's also launching a community engagement plan to consult with local residents, beach users, and other relevant stakeholders to capture and report community priorities. And so the goal of this plan is to share information and increase public awareness of nature-based solutions to sea level rise impacts to coastal erosion, to consult with communities. Another priority is to consult with communities to incorporate their priorities for the restoration, as well as to enhance existing partnerships and collaboration within the state to build capacity for future coastal resilience projects to protect Hawaii's communities. And so the commission is currently drafting out a community engagement scope of work to be implemented during the feasibility assessment. So any partnerships, lessons learned, and methods employed through this project hopefully will be applicable to other vulnerable lengths of the shorefront highway on Oahu and seawide. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Any questions on this? Righty. Yeah, so our grants to Project Bridge crosswalk work with the IIJA bill funding is still going on. We were really close to getting this information out to you folks before the meeting, but we will be reaching out to you with some projects that we've identified that can be funded by grants or funding from the IIJA bill. So look out for those emails. And we're also asking for projects from you folks. I think we've sent out a few emails, gotten some responses, so thank you for those. We're really looking for these discrete projects that we can add to our grants to Project Bridge so that we can then be more prepared as more of these funding opportunities come through, and we can help to identify where the funding can be spent to make sure there's not more money left on the table, and we're really doing the best we can to address all of these climate-ready actions. Also, a new initiative that has been published on our website is a kind of analysis of the Justice 40 indicators. So with the social vulnerability indicators that we presented at the last meeting, worked with UH to develop this guide that looks at the Justice 40 initiative, which is a requirement of a lot of the total federal funding that's going to be used as you go towards disadvantaged, marginalized, underserved, and overburdened communities. So to be eligible for a lot of the federal funding, especially with the IIJA bill funding, we need to indicate whether we are addressing these Justice 40 indicators. And so this guide really helps to identify the data sets that are required. And so you can hopefully make it a little bit easier for folks applying for grants to identify whether they're going to be eligible or not for those. I just wanted to give you folks all a heads up that I will be presenting at the Hawaii Conservation Conference tomorrow at 8 a.m. That's in collaboration with the Hawaii Conservation Alliance and the USDA Forest Service. We're looking at synergizing climate mitigation adaptation in Hawaii. What this is really hoping to be is an interactive session where we're going to be seeking ideas and input on how to better coordinate a knowledge exchange of climate information, making it more accessible to folks. The goal is to create a coordinated structure for Hawaii that serves the diverse organizations that engage in climate adaptation and mitigation. So just taking a lot of the feedback that we've been getting about how it's hard to access a lot of these information and seeing how we can best do that in the future. And finally, we have updated the next meeting date for October 19th, 2022. That's largely due to the scheduling of COP. So hopefully you folks can make it that day. If there are any red flags or people just absolutely can't make it, please let me know. If we have an overwhelming number of people unable to attend, we can shift it again. But so far the state looks like it's working well. So that is it from me.
Okay, that's fantastic information and projects. Thank you to everyone working on them. Any comments, commissioners, on any of these projects? And is there any public testimony on these? All right, hearing none, that does bring us to the end of our meeting. Any final comments before we wrap it up at a pretty precise 3:30? All right, I want to thank everyone very much for being here today and for all the terrific work you're doing on climate change mitigation and adaptation in Hawaii. It's nothing more essential than that for keeping us all going on this planet. So thanks all very much.